It began on a quiet Sunday morning in Bainbridge, Indiana, a small town west of Indianapolis where the days usually pass without incident and where neighbors still wave from their porches. But on September 30th, 2024, that calm was shattered when a house caught fire on County Road 200 North. The home belonged to 33-year-old Britney Gard, a devoted mother of two known for her warmth and reliability. That morning, she was supposed to meet her 13-year-old daughter at a school volleyball game. She never arrived. By the time firefighters reached the property, smoke had already started pouring through the roof. Inside, they found signs of an ordinary life suddenly interrupted. A purse still resting on a counter, her car still in the driveway, her phone missing but not far. The flames were extinguished quickly, but what they left behind was something no one expected. No trace of Britney anywhere. Her family's reaction was immediate and desperate. To those who knew her best, there was no question this was not like Britney. She was steady, dependable, and fiercely protective of her children. The thought that she might have just left on her own didn't make sense. When her daughter realized her mother wasn't in the stands at the gym that night, the panic began to spread. For the next several days, Putnam County Sheriff's deputies, volunteers, and local search teams combed through miles of farmland and forest surrounding Bainbridge. They deployed drones, K-9 units, and divers, searching through ponds, cornfields, and nature trails, working through day and night in hopes of finding any sign of her. Her family watched, exhausted and terrified. They pleaded for answers, for any clue that could explain what had happened. The home was treated as a potential crime scene. The fire itself, labeled suspicious by investigators, only deepened the mystery. Days passed with no leads, no credit card activity, no phone signals, no eyewitnesses. For 8 long days, Britney Gard was missing, and as each day passed, what started as a missing persons case began to feel more like a nightmare that no one could explain. But then came a single call, one that would change everything. 8 days after she vanished, a 911 dispatcher in Putnam County received a call from a number that had been silent since the morning of the fire. The voice on the other end was weak, but unmistakably familiar. It was Britney Gard. She was alive. Authorities quickly traced the call. The GPS coordinates led them to a wooded area inside a nature preserve, just 2.5 miles from her home. Deputies raced to the scene and found her there, conscious, confused, but alive. After more than a week of uncertainty, she was finally located. Her phone, the one everyone assumed had been destroyed or discarded, had been with her the entire time. And when she dialed 911, the signal triggered an alert to her family, the first sign of hope they'd had in over a week. Britney was rushed to a nearby hospital for evaluation. Her family gathered there, relieved but bewildered. She was safe, but the questions that had haunted Bainbridge for 8 days were far from answered, because now the mystery had only deepened. If Britney hadn't been kidnapped, if she hadn't fled town, if she'd been within walking distance all along, then where had she been? And what really happened in that house before it burned? In the days that followed Britney Gard's rescue, Bainbridge became a small town caught in a very big mystery. The relief of finding her alive quickly gave way to confusion and then unease. Sheriff Scott Stockton stood before cameras outside the Putnam County Sheriff's Office, his tone measured, careful. "We're still investigating all possibilities," he said. "Right now, our focus is on Britney's well-being." Behind the official calm, though, there were more questions than answers. The fire that destroyed part of Britney's home hadn't been random. That much was clear. Investigators from the Indiana State Fire Marshal's office confirmed early on that the blaze was suspicious in origin. What they didn't say publicly was that the fire had started in multiple locations, a possible sign of deliberate ignition. Yet nothing about the scene made sense. Her car was parked outside, keys inside. Her purse sat untouched on the counter. Her phone was missing, but later discovered near her, intact and functional. And, most curiously, there was no sign of forced entry. The house had simply caught fire, and Britney was gone. That absence, the empty space she left behind, consumed her family. Friends and relatives began organizing vigils, printing flyers, and forming search groups that fanned out into nearby fields. It was those volunteers who would eventually lead search dogs along the wooded area where she was later found, an area so close to her home that the discovery raised new questions. How could hundreds of trained searchers have missed her for 8 days? Inside the hospital, Britney was being treated for dehydration and exhaustion. Deputies were posted outside her room for her safety, though investigators never confirmed whether they believed she was a victim of crime or a witness to one. Family members were told not to share details with the media, and for several days, the sheriff's office released no updates. But the silence only fueled speculation. Local Facebook groups turned into armchair detective boards. Some residents believed she'd been taken and managed to escape. Others wondered if she'd suffered a mental health crisis and wandered off after the fire. A few whispered theories no one wanted to say out loud, that maybe the fire and her disappearance were connected in ways too dark to imagine. Her family stayed quiet, protecting her privacy, while the community's curiosity grew. Every word from officials was parsed for hidden meaning. When the sheriff referred to her case as a missing persons investigation with ongoing follow-up, it didn't sound like closure. It sounded like something unresolved. Then, more details began to emerge. Deputies had found her in Big Walnut Nature Preserve, a protected stretch of dense forest and wetlands not far from her burn home. It was a place she was familiar with. She'd been seen hiking there before with her kids. But surviving there for more than a week, without food or consistent shelter, seemed impossible. There were no signs of a campfire, no evidence of tools or supplies. What investigators did find, however, was her cell phone, the same one used to make the 911 call. It was still functional, its battery barely alive. How she kept it powered, or why she hadn't called sooner, remained unclear. By then, the FBI had quietly offered assistance, focusing on whether any digital trace, texts, pings, or online activity could explain the 8 missing days. But all they found was silence. Her phone had gone offline at the same time the fire began. No calls, no GPS, no pings. When she finally spoke to authorities, the details were vague. She remembered being disoriented. She couldn't explain the fire. She didn't know how she got to the preserve. Her story wasn't inconsistent. It was simply empty. That blankness was what made investigators uneasy. Because Britney Gard hadn't vanished into the wilderness. She had vanished within walking distance of her own home, and somehow survived unseen, unheard, for over a week. It didn't add up. And in Bainbridge, whispers were beginning to sound less like rumors and more like fear. Something had happened that morning in that house. Something that no one could yet explain. By the 3rd week after Britney Gard was found, the story had grown beyond Bainbridge. It was now a national curiosity, one of those rare, haunting cases that defy logic and linger in the mind. A missing woman found alive after 8 days in the woods near her own burning home. A fire ruled suspicious. A community divided between relief and disbelief. Reporters began to arrive. Not the usual small-town correspondents, but regional and network crews drawn by the contradictions in the case. The more they looked, the less sense it made. Neighbors described Britney as devoted, dependable, and deeply family-oriented. She was raising her children largely on her own, holding down a steady job, and was known to check in regularly with family. She wasn't the type to vanish. She wasn't the type to leave her children behind. And yet, the timeline of that morning, the day everything fell apart, offered few answers. Shortly before dawn, residents reported smelling smoke and seeing flickers of light near County Road 200 North. When firefighters arrived, the flames were concentrated in the kitchen and living room, areas far apart. Inside, they found an overturned chair, a shattered coffee mug, and signs of disruption, though nothing conclusive. There was no body, no blood, just absence and ash. Detectives noted that several items seemed intentionally placed, as if someone tried to remove or hide certain evidence before the fire spread. One family photo frame was found face down, unburned, in an otherwise charred hallway. Investigators couldn't say why. The official statement was careful. We are investigating the cause of the fire and all related circumstances surrounding Ms. Gard's disappearance. Unofficially, though, the word circulating among first responders was staged. That theory, that the fire may have been deliberately set to mask something else, would become the quiet undercurrent in the weeks that followed. Inside the hospital, Britney remained in recovery and under evaluation. She was cooperative, polite, and visibly shaken, but her recollections were fragmented. She described moments of confusion, long stretches of silence, and an overwhelming sense of fear. She said she woke up in the woods, unsure how she got there, unsure how long she'd been unconscious. She didn't remember starting the fire. She didn't remember leaving the house. To investigators, that kind of memory loss wasn't unusual after trauma, but they couldn't ignore what they called gaps too clean to ignore. Her family stood by her completely. Her sister, speaking briefly to reporters, said, "She's been through something terrible, but she's here, and that's all that matters right now." Her tone was steady, but her eyes said more, a mix of exhaustion, fear, and something else. The sheriff's office issued periodic updates, each one brief and tightly worded. There was no mention of foul play, no arrests, no suspects, and no answers. But in small towns, silence can be its own kind of noise. People began to draw lines between the facts, the fire, the missing days, the phone that suddenly reappeared with perfect timing. Some wondered if Britney had been running from someone. Others whispered about the possibility of coercion, that someone had kept her in that preserve, hidden from sight, until she was finally able to call for help. Yet for all those theories, there was no evidence, no footprints, no discarded clothing, no secondary site. Only the phone and her word. Even investigators admitted they were working in the dark. This is one of the most unusual cases we've seen, one official told local media. There's just nothing. As the nights grew colder, the search teams that had once scoured the fields for her now found themselves walking the same ground again, but this time, searching for answers. A quiet question began to settle over Bainbridge. If Britney Gard didn't vanish into the woods by choice, then who or what took her there? By early November, the calm of Bainbridge had returned only on the surface. The town's harvest season carried on. The streets looked unchanged, but beneath the quiet, the mystery of Britney Gard had taken on a life of its own. The sheriff's office no longer spoke publicly about the case. Officially, it was still classified as an ongoing investigation. Unofficially, locals began to sense what no one wanted to say out loud. There might never be a satisfying answer, but for investigators, the work hadn't stopped. The fire marshal's laboratory results were finally in, and they confirmed that accelerants had been present in at least 2 locations inside the home. The fire was intentionally set. The question that haunted detectives was why, and by whom? Investigators revisited the timeline again and again. Britney's last confirmed contact was a short phone call the night before the fire, a conversation with her teenage daughter about the next day's game. Nothing in her tone suggested distress. There were no reports of arguments, no signs of financial trouble, and no restraining orders or criminal history of any kind. So what could explain the deliberate destruction of her home, and her disappearance right after? Deputies began combing through nearby properties, interviewing residents again. One neighbor recalled seeing a faint flicker of light near the back of the Gard property around 6 a.m., too early for headlights, too low for lightning. He thought little of it at the time. Another mentioned hearing a sharp noise, like a door slamming, before smoke began to rise. The fragment of testimony painted a picture that was disjointed but troubling. Someone may have been there before dawn. At the same time, Britney herself was undergoing quiet therapy sessions. Her family hoped that the fog of memory might clear, that some detail might return, but if it did, she didn't share it. What she did say, according to a close relative, was this: "I woke up and everything was gone. I could hear something crackling, and I just ran." She claimed she didn't remember leaving her home. She didn't remember how she got to the woods. What she did recall, faintly, were sounds, footsteps crunching behind her in the dark, a distant engine, and silence after that. Investigators found the story haunting, but inconclusive. It didn't match the physical evidence. The burn pattern in the house suggested multiple ignition points, the work of someone deliberate, methodical. Yet the emotional evidence suggested a woman caught in something beyond her control. If she fled an intruder, Why hadn't she sought help immediately? If she'd been abducted, why was there no sign of another person? Even seasoned detectives struggled to draw a line between fact and fear. Meanwhile, reporters from Indianapolis and Chicago returned to Bainbridge, producing hour-long features on a mother who vanished so close to home. Their tone was clinical but fascinated, echoing what the community already felt, that this wasn't just a mystery, but a riddle with human stakes. They retraced the timeline, mapped the geography, and even walked the same trails where Britney had been found. One journalist noted that the area was eerily silent, a place where sound seems to disappear before it reaches you. To viewers, that description became symbolic, a metaphor for a case swallowed by silence. The sheriff's office maintained that Britney was not facing any charges. She is not considered a suspect, they said. Our goal is to understand what happened. Still, behind closed doors, the case file thickened. Detectives were looking at digital forensics, deleted data, old messages, and app logs. There were rumors that certain files had been erased shortly before the fire. When pressed for comment, officials declined, citing privacy laws. What was clear was that every piece of evidence led only to more uncertainty. By the 6th week after her return, the story began to recede from national headlines, but in Bainbridge, it hadn't faded. At the local diner, people still lowered their voices when her name came up. In the evenings, headlights slowed as they passed the fenced-off ruins of the Gard home. And there was one detail, small but unforgettable, that reporters kept circling back to. When Britney was found in the preserve, she was wearing the same clothes she'd worn the morning of the fire. Her watch had stopped at 6:42 a.m., roughly the same time the fire was first reported. That moment, frozen in time, became the emblem of her mystery. Because in all the hours she spent missing, all the questions still unanswered, and all the evidence that refused to align, one thing seemed inescapable. Whatever happened that morning had left its mark on her long before the flames began to rise. And even after her survival, Bainbridge still felt the echo of something unfinished. The past, as detectives would soon learn, never truly disappeared in Bainbridge. It lingered, buried under quiet lives and polite smiles, waiting for the right moment to surface. For Britney Gard, that moment had come like fire. Investigators began piecing together fragments of her life before marriage, before motherhood, before Bainbridge. What they uncovered was a different woman altogether. 15 years earlier, Britney had been part of a small startup with her then-best friend, Melissa Kane. The business promised home restorations with a modern twist, targeting historic Indiana houses. It started well, but within a year the company collapsed amid rumors of stolen funds, falsified invoices, and an accidental fire at one of their renovation sites. Insurance had covered the loss, but there were quiet suspicions it wasn't an accident. Neither woman was charged, and both moved on, at least publicly. But the damage had split their friendship for good. Now, 15 years later, another fire, another vanishing act. The similarities were impossible to ignore. Detectives brought Melissa in again. This time, she arrived with a lawyer. She denied any wrongdoing, insisted she hadn't been near Britney's house that night, and said Britney was always dramatic. When asked about the old business, she deflected, claiming she'd been the one betrayed, not Britney. Still, something in her tone caught the lead investigator's attention, a faint tremor beneath her words, like fear wrapped in resentment. Meanwhile, Britney was discharged from the hospital and moved to a relative's home under quiet supervision, but she refused to stay indoors after dark. Neighbors reported seeing her sitting on the porch at 3 a.m. watching the road, as if waiting for something. When her sister asked what she was doing, Britney simply said, "He's not done yet." No one knew who he was, not even detectives, who were now growing desperate to identify the man behind the mysterious threats. Then one morning, a letter arrived at the sheriff's office. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper bearing 4 words cut from magazine clippings. "She knows the truth." Beneath it was a photo, grainy, taken at night, showing Britney and Melissa standing in front of the burned shell of Britney's house, their faces ghostly in the firelight. Neither woman remembered such a moment being captured. Investigators examined the photo for digital manipulation, but found none. The timestamp embedded in the file's data showed it had been taken the night of the fire, before Britney disappeared. Whoever sent the letter had been there, watching. The discovery shattered the fragile quiet of the investigation. Detectives now suspected a third player, someone connected to both women, possibly from their shared past. They began revisiting old insurance records, employee lists, client files from their defunct renovation business. One name appeared more than once. Mark Lusk, brother of Aaron, the contractor already under suspicion. 15 years earlier, Mark had worked as a subcontractor on their projects before being fired under murky circumstances. He had sued Britney and Melissa, claiming unpaid wages, and lost. A few months later, his workshop burned down. He'd left town soon after, never to be heard from again. Until now, detectives tracked down an old vehicle registration in his name, a dark pickup truck, nearly identical to Aaron's. They compared the gas station footage again, enhancing the image frame by frame. The driver wasn't Aaron at all. The jawline, the gait as he stepped out, it matched Mark's old ID photo from the lawsuit file. Mark Lusk had returned to Bainbridge. As soon as the realization hit, a patrol was dispatched to his last known address, an abandoned farmhouse 30 miles out, swallowed by overgrown weeds. Inside, they found tools, a makeshift cot, and dozens of newspaper clippings about the Bainbridge fire. On one wall, photos of Britney were tacked up in a collage. Her smiling, her walking her daughter to school, her standing on her porch. Someone had been watching her for months. And pinned in the center of that wall, burned at the edges, was a photograph from years ago, Britney, Melissa, and Mark, all smiling at a work site. On the back, scrawled in fading ink, were the words, "You promised me." The next 48 hours were chaos. A manhunt began at dawn. Roads were blocked, drones deployed, every available deputy searching the surrounding counties. Reporters descended on the small town as residents locked their doors and whispered that the ghost from Britney's past had come home. Meanwhile, Britney herself seemed to sense it. When officers went to check on her, they found her pacing in the living room, clutching a phone that wouldn't stop ringing. Each time, a blocked number. When she finally answered, she froze, her face draining of color. The line went dead. That night, she told her sister, he said the fire was enough. Detectives knew then that she wasn't safe. They placed her under protective watch. But even with surveillance, the tension in Bainbridge was unbearable. The question had shifted from who burned her house to why he had waited so long to return. What unfinished truth had been left smoldering all these years? The answer would come, just not in the way anyone expected. The following morning, a local farmer called 911 after spotting smoke rising from an old barn on his property, 20 miles north of town. When firefighters arrived, they found the structure partially burned but empty, save for one thing, a wallet belonging to Mark Lusk, and beside it, a charred notebook. Inside, though mostly ruined, one phrase remained legible across a blackened page. She took everything. If you stand on County Road 300 a day just west of Bainbridge, you can still see the remnants of what used to be the Gard home, a blackened foundation surrounded by pale grass. The local fire department cleared the debris months ago, but the smell of smoke lingers in the air when the wind shifts. To the community, it's a reminder that some stories end without closure, and that sometimes survival isn't the same as safety. Britney Gard has not spoken publicly since the morning she was found. The last official word from the Putnam County Sheriff's Office came in a brief press release confirming that the fire remains under investigation and that no suspect had been identified. They added that there was no threat to the public. Those 6 words have become a line between reassurance and unease. Because if there's no threat to anyone else, what exactly happened to Britney? Her family continues to protect her privacy. They've said she's healing both physically and emotionally, but they've avoided interviews, and friends describe her as distant, quieter, easily startled. One relative told a local paper that she still wakes up, sometimes thinking she's hearing fire crackle. The only first-hand detail the public has ever received came from an unconfirmed family statement. That Britney was confused, dehydrated, and disoriented when found, and that she did not appear to understand how much time had passed. That was months ago. Since then, nothing. But in journalism, silence is rarely the end. In the weeks that followed, reporters pieced together fragments from public records and interviews, not speculation, but context. They found that Britney had recently filed minor insurance claims on household items lost in the fire. They found her name attached to a GoFundMe created by her sister, asking for help rebuilding her life. And they found what could only be called the contradictions of recovery. Because how do you rebuild when you don't yet understand what happened? Neighbors said they sometimes saw her sitting in her car near the ruins. Not for long, just minutes at a time, before driving off. The sheriff's deputies checked on her periodically, but no new evidence surfaced. Every lead led back to the same question. What would cause a devoted mother to vanish from her own neighborhood, only to be found so close, less than 3 miles away, in a public area that had already been searched? The searchers themselves still ask that question. To retrace the mystery, you have to go back to that morning, October 1st, when the fire began. The blaze was reported just after 7 a.m. Her daughter, preparing for a volleyball game, was already on her way to school. Neighbors spotted smoke rising from the side of the house and called 911. Firefighters arrived within minutes. The cars were in the driveway. The door was unlocked. The purse was inside. But Britney was gone. In those early hours, it seemed straightforward. A missing person case tied to a house fire. But then came the first twist. The car never moved, her phone went dark, and all digital activity stopped cold. 8 days later, that same phone came alive again, its GPS signal pinging from the defied Nature Preserve, 2.5 miles away. The 911 call was from Britney herself. Her voice, dispatcher said, was weak but coherent. She said she needed help, that she didn't know where she was, only that she was cold and couldn't walk much farther. Responders traced the signal and reached her within minutes. She was lying near a trail, half covered by brush, wearing the same clothes from the morning she vanished. She was conscious, confused, and alone, and the investigation since that moment has failed to explain the gap, the missing 8 days that no one can account for. Authorities haven't ruled out any scenario: foul play, mental health crisis, fugue state, or deliberate disappearance. But none of them align neatly with the facts. If it was foul play, where's the evidence? No DNA, no signs of restraint, no witness accounts. If it was voluntary, why the fire and why remain silent? If it was mental or medical, could disorientation alone sustain someone in the cold October nights, without food or water, in a public reserve? Each explanation collapses under its own weight. What investigators do know is this: the area where she was found had been searched multiple times by volunteers and drones. No trace of her was reported, which leaves two possibilities. She wasn't there at first, or she was there and unseen. Either answer is unsettling. What lingers about this story isn't just a mystery. It's the proximity, the irony that a mother could disappear within walking distance of her home, while hundreds searched all around her. It's the sense that something simple must be missing from the puzzle, one small truth that would make everything else make sense. But until that truth surfaces, Bainbridge remains haunted by what they can't explain. When night falls over the preserve, the trails go dark by 7 p.m. You can hear the crickets, the faraway hum of cars on Route 36, and sometimes, according to locals, the faint echo of something else. A woman's voice, or maybe the wind moving through the trees. They don't talk about it much anymore, but you can feel it when you walk there, that thin space between fear and unanswered questions. And as for Britney Gard, she's still here, still living somewhere nearby, still carrying a silence that no press release or headline can fill. Her story isn't just about what happened in those 8 days. It's about how little we can ever really know, even about the people we think we understand. Because sometimes the scariest mysteries aren't the ones that take someone far away. They're the ones that unfold right at home. Vanished so close to home, that's what people call it now. A story that started with fire, ended in survival, and left behind a question no one can yet answer. And until that answer comes, this will remain one of the strangest, most haunting disappearances in Indiana's memory. Not because of how far she went, but because of how close she was all along.